Hi, this is Judy from Bungalow Quilting and Yarn, and today we're going to talk about ruffle fabric. We sell ruffle fabric here at Bungalow Quilting and Yarn in a lot of different colors, but it seems that it's still kind of a mystery to people when they look at it. They're not really sure what it's all about or how to use it. Ruffle fabric is 100% polyester and it comes 60 inches wide. We sell it by the 1 yard packets in all different colors. We also have a bolt of just plain black, because the black is probably the color that's going to go the fastest, so we have an entire bolt of that. This is the navy blue. Now I want to show you some of the different things that you can do with ruffle fabric. This is a little baby blanket where I use the entire width of ruffle fabric, which is 60 inches wide. Now when I say that it's 60 inches wide, I mean that the selvages are here and here. So the ruffles run perpendicular to the selvage. The ruffles, as you can see, are attached to the base piece of fabric, and the ruffles themselves come in different lengths. This is a very short ruffle. They go one direction as well. It is a directional fabric. So this is how they are laying flat. This is how they are if you go the opposite direction with them. It is a directional fabric. So you can see the potential for all different ways that you could design on the outsides of the ruffle this way as well. This piece was applied wrong sides together with a piece of double gauze with a piece of batting in between. It wasn't quilted, it was just sewn around the outside edges, and that's enough to keep it intact. It washes up beautifully, as most polyester does. This is 100% cotton on the back. This is a double gauze, and then it's just got a binding put onto it. Here's another one done with a wider cascading ruffle. It's a 1-inch ruffle. Again, it's directional. This is the width. The ruffle always runs perpendicular to the selvage. The selvage would be here and here, and the ruffle is going to run perpendicular. It's 60 inches wide. This is a little light summer baby blanket. On the back, I've got a knit, because knits are 60 inches wide most of the time. All you had to do with this one is get a yard of the knit and a yard of the ruffle fabric, put them wrong sides together, and attach a binding. Now it sounds simple, and it is simple, but there are a few things that you have to keep in mind, and we'll get to that after I show you the rest of the things that we've done with the ruffle fabric. This is probably my favorite. This is a 1-inch cascading ruffle, 60 inches wide once again, 1 yard. On the back is Cuddle, Shannon Cuddle. Don't get that mixed up with regular Minky or generic brands that you can find at cheaper Hobby Lobby and Joann's. We talked about that in a different video. Again, we've got wrong sides together with a binding and no batting in between. Look at the texture that gives to a room if you're laying it across a chair or using it as a baby blanket. It's absolutely gorgeous. Can you use it in other kinds of quilts? Absolutely. Here we've put it into blocks. We cut the pieces up into 5.5-inch squares, just like our 5.5-inch squares of regular cotton fabric, and added it in by interfacing the back. I tend to use a woven interfacing that is fusible, not a non-woven, but a woven fusible, and iron it onto the back of the piece of ruffle fabric. Cut it slightly larger and then trim it down to 5.5 inches. And then you just set them in to your quilt just like you would with any other fabric. And again, it gives a lot of texture. If you're giving this to a baby, they could play with the ruffles and have that extra texture feeling, but it also just is nice even for a quilt for an adult. Now, garment sewing was probably the primary purpose for this fabric. I'm going to demonstrate how to make a skirt with this ruffle fabric. This is the very short 1/2-inch cascading ruffles. This skirt was made with the width of the fabric, 60 inches, gathered and then applied to a yoke, and then an elastic casing put into the regular cotton that was made for the yoke, and that's how you would get a skirt with this. The nice thing about the ruffle fabric is that it doesn't ravel, so you don't have to put up a hem. All you do is cut off that edge and it will never ever ravel no matter how much washing. Here's one that doesn't have the yoke on the top, but actually has a nice piece of white elastic that's real soft and sparkly, applied to the top of the ruffle fabric. Again, no hem at the base. You're using the entire 60-inch width. You have only one seam in the back, and it's got the elastic on the top. Now, we do sell it in 1-yard packages. And you might think to yourself, well, this certainly doesn't need a yard of fabric, and it doesn't need a yard of fabric. But when you have leftovers of the ruffle fabric, there are so many things you can do. This is a purse that we've made with some leftover ruffle fabric. The ruffle fabric can be applied right to the top of your regular fabric. You can kind of see the fabric through there, which is really pretty, and it adds a lot of interest. I've just stitched it to the top of this fabric and just added it on and continued to sew as if it were just any other piece of fabric. Sewed it into the edges. Now, here are some helpful hints. When you're sewing something with ruffle fabric and you're sewing it on something like this, it's helpful to baste the ruffles down so that they're all going one direction. With this blanket here, before I sewed anything together with it, I basted all these edges down so that the ruffle was going down. You can baste by hand or you can baste by machine. So let's go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you what I mean by basting the ruffles down. So here's a piece that I'm going to use for a skirt, probably for my daughter or one of my nieces. I basted the edge. This is the selvage edge. And remember we said that the ruffles go perpendicular to the selvage. So what I did was I took a long stitch and basted the ruffles down. That way, while you're sewing, you don't have to worry that one's going to flip up as you're sewing your seam and be going a different direction. I did the same thing on this opposite end. Like I said, you're going to use the entire width of the 60 inches for a skirt. I basted that edge down. I cut 18 inches of the ruffle fabric. So it's a rectangle that's 18 inches by 60 inches. This is how we're going to make the skirt, okay? So at the top of the ruffle fabric, when you cut between the ruffles. You can see that this is how it looks between the ruffles. I'll lay it down here so maybe you can see it a little bit better. So you have some space between the two ruffles where you can cut. You can cut just right in there and keep cutting along that line, and then you know you're cutting straight. So that's what I did for this. So here's my top edge. I gathered it slightly and divided it in fourths. Okay, so here's a fourth, here's a fourth, here's a fourth, and here's the end. I measured my elastic. I wanted it to be 28 inches long, and I divided that into fourths. So this is going to be the skirt that you sew that doesn't have the yoke at the top, that just has the elastic. So this is curling up on me here. So this is wide elastic, and I'm going to put it, now I put the walking foot on my sewing machine, and I've used gray thread because it's easier to see. Normally you would use black thread, but I've used gray thread so that you can see it. So there's my basting, and here is my gathering stitch. Now I have the gray thread in here now because this elastic is silver. So I'm going to lay this on top, wrong side of the elastic to the right side of the ruffle fabric. I'm going to lay it across the top, and I've got my walking foot on because that just helps a little bit with. Okay, let's put this stitch length down to a normal stitch length, maybe slightly longer than what you'd typically use. And I'm going to back stitch here. Okay, so I'm going to keep this nice and flat, and I'm going to stretch my elastic. I'm going to hold it on that end, and I'm going to stretch it. Stretch it as I sew. Now the fabric is already gathered. Make sure you put your needle stop down, which is what I've just done here. Now I'm going to stretch it as I sew. Now, remember I said I marked it into fourths. I want this first 1/4 needle or pin to match this 1/4 pin so that I know that I'm not stretching more in one place than in another. Okay, so here we are coming up to that other pin. I'm going to stretch that until that pin matches that pin. We're not there yet. I don't want to stretch it any more than that because those pins are now matching. You're going to keep it above the basting stitch or the gathering stitch so that you don't see that through. And you're going to continue until you get to the end. Okay, so now we're coming up on the end. I've met the last pin for the last quarter of the elastic and the skirt. So the 2 pins that are marked the 3/4 mark. And I'm going to stretch this now to get it to go the rest of the way to the end of the skirt. So you can see I've completely covered up the gathering stitch. The back stitch. I'm going to clip my threads. Now we've got the skirt, but we don't have a back seam yet. So what we're going to do is put these right sides together, go over to the serger, and serge down. Okay, so if you don't have a serger, it's just as easy to do this with a regular sewing machine. It's okay to do it with a regular sewing machine, but then you're going to have to remember that you're going to have to finish off the edge. So a serger basically is just a machine that cuts at the same time and finishes off the edges. So it's trimming everything at once. So you can see the importance of my basting these ruffles down so that I don't have them going different directions. They're going to lay flat when I sew this because I've got this basted, and I'm covering that basting stitch. I'm going beyond it so that it's not going to be seen on the outside. Now, like I said, there's no hemming involved with this because it's a polyester fabric. It's got an edge that won't ravel ever. Another good use for this fabric would be pajama bottoms, or maybe on the front of a top or the bottom of a t-shirt. You could add some ruffles to the bottom of a t-shirt. Okay, so there we have it. Now I would trim those threads off, take out my pins, and there you have it. A skirt that took less than a half an hour to make and is very dressy and very elegant. So I hope that this cleared up any questions that you have about ruffle fabric and that you'll come into Bungalow Quilting and Yarn and pick some up.